A life on a bicycle is a really liberated existence in touch with the community. And it's something that anyone can have, being really part of your surroundings, not separated, can open your eyes to so many things. This is about people feeling safe and confident, comfortable, happy, filled with joy, doing transportation the way that they want to do transportation. People should be able to go where they want to go. And that sort of freedom, you kind of couple that with the health benefits, both the physical and mental health benefits of it. And it's an astonishing piece of equipment. Dust that thing off, pump up the tires, and go for a very, very short ride. And you'll feel it. You'll feel it.
Hi, Avi. Thank you so much for joining us at We Are Mentally United podcast.
Thanks for having me.
How are you? How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm great. I led today a 20-mile 5 Jewish deli bike tour. It's called the Jewish Deli Bike Tour. And I think we started with about 75 folks. It branched off into 2 rides, one for adults and one for kids. And it was glorious.
Oh, that sounds really exciting. Well, for folks who may not know you, can you give a brief introduction about yourself and the profession you are in and the work that you're doing?
So I lead the Bike Streets Project, which is a Denver-based community organization dedicated to helping more people use bikes to get around the city of Denver. Our work is really in 3 buckets. The first is we lead group bike tours all over the city with a variety of different organizations, community organizations ranging from the public library to the Jewish Community Center in this particular case, to any number of other organizations. We did a ride a couple of years ago with the Colorado Village Collaborative, which does housing for the unhoused population in our community. So we lead, first off, a lot of group bike rides around Denver. Second, we publish what has become known as the Low Stress Denver Bike Map. And the idea behind the Low Stress Denver Bike Map is that anyone of any age, ability, or background should be able to ride a bicycle to any destination in our community today. And it's not exactly the world's greatest bit of infrastructure out there, but we have found ways through a crowdsourced process, through talking to our friends and neighbors, to create this map that, even though it's not perfect, you can use to get anywhere in Denver today. And third, we publish an app called the Bike Streets app, which is for people to get turn-by-turn navigation to any destination that they want, and to participate in our club, our community, in collecting, accruing total miles ridden together as a community. And the idea is the more we ride, the more significant the total number of community miles that we generate, the more inclined, we hope at least, the city is to invest in bike infrastructure that anyone can use. So it's really those 3 things: the group rides, the Low Stress Denver Bike Map, and the Bike Streets app.
Well, that sounds really amazing because I feel like that these are some kinds of projects that are much more needed in the community in today's time and age, with how stressful and how busy the streets are becoming with cars and with buses and with public transport in general. Do you feel like how's the feedback been when you've been working with people? What are some of the responses that you've been hearing from people?
We've been doing this work since 2018, and we've certainly learned a lot as we have gone. And the map is not really a fixed object. Instead, it's constantly evolving based on ongoing community feedback. And we're constantly improving it, modifying it, tweaking it, making adjustments. So it's evolved a tremendous amount since 2018. And the general feedback is that people are incredibly supportive of this idea that we shouldn't have to wait 20, 30, however many years it's going to take to create a complete, what is known as high comfort bike network, that people today should really be able to ride their bikes anywhere. And that message resonates with folks. Now, this is not to say that we as a community shouldn't be investing in bike infrastructure. To the contrary, we should be investing more and more. The question is, while we are waiting for those investments to produce a complete network that anyone can use to get from point A to point B, whatever point A or point B might actually be in your particular case, that we should be able to go places. And so it's really important for both of those things to happen at once, for the city and the community to invest in high quality bike infrastructure that is accessible for all people, and for us as community members to feel comfortable using our bikes today.
Yeah, I keep hearing you say communities, and the work that you're doing with Bike Streets is very heavily community focused. Where did that idea, or where did that inspiration come from about like focusing so heavily on the community?
Well, I have been a bike rider my whole life. I grew up riding my bike pretty much everywhere I could ride my bike. And it wasn't until I was just fresh out of college and living in Chicago, which at the time didn't have any formal bike infrastructure of consequence, other than the amazing trail along Lake Michigan, but in the city itself. And I was one of those sort of like, hardcore urban bicyclists. And that was really me and a small cohort of other people. But what I could see and what was fascinating was that this was an active, sort of like a fringe activity. It was not something that everyone was doing, riding in traffic under the L tracks and that sort of thing. There was one giant exception to that. Actually, there were a few giant exceptions to that. One was that people rode all the time on the lakefront trail because they felt comfortable there. The second was that every month Chicago had, or maybe even more frequently, I don't remember the exact cadence, but on an ongoing basis during the warm months, Chicago had this ride that was known as Critical Mass. And everyone would meet in one place. And we're talking about not just the confident bicyclists, but even people who weren't especially confident riding on their bikes. And for just that one set of a few hours every now and then, the downtown streets would be transformed into this incredible place where people felt comfortable, people were happy. It always happened on a Friday, and people would say, "Happy Friday" to everyone as they went past. And it was really amazing to see how folks who normally, and I knew a lot of these people, didn't feel comfortable riding their bikes in the urban grit of Chicago, all of a sudden felt capable, empowered, like this was something that they could do. And then, last but not least, once a year, the city of Chicago, or some folks in the city of Chicago, put on something that was called Bike the Drive. And Lakeshore Drive is this highway that is along Lake Michigan and runs the full length of the city of Chicago. I think it's 15 miles or so from the south side, the Museum of Science and Industry, all the way up to the north side. And for one morning, once a year, it was shut down and only bicyclists rode on it. And there were probably on any given ride 20, 30,000 people. And it was just astonishing to see the level of joy that people had through these types of experiences. So those two in tandem, really the latter two, Critical Mass, which might have been 500 or 1,000 people riding, and Bike the Drive, were this incredibly vivid display of what it's like when people are surrounded by a community of bicyclists, and how it can totally transform a city, the experience of living in a city, and bring such an incredible amount of joy to people.
Definitely. And I feel like that's the power of community, whether that be with biking, jogging, exercising, when people who share similar passions, similar interests, when they come together, when they unite together, it just eliminates all the differences that we feel like we may have within the community. So that's really, really inspiring. And I'm really glad that you're doing that. Were you always into biking since you were a kid?
I grew up biking. In fact, I was born in a community that had what was probably at the time the premier professional cycling event in North America. But I don't know that for sure, but it was certainly a big deal in that community. And it was really, I don't know if that was where I became interested or fascinated in the bicycle, but certainly throughout my childhood and while I was in college and ever since, I have been fascinated by the incredible power that a bicycle represents. And really it is and not to trivialize this, but it is really a symbol of freedom and liberty, in that it is this incredibly simple machine relative to some of the other machines that we use. The machine that we're using to communicate right now is a case in point. What we're talking about with the bicycle in its form that most of us know it is a machine from the 1800s. And it is a machine that I think you can make a strong argument is the most efficient machine that humanity has ever created. Because on a carrot, you can ride across a city, and you can ride across a city in a city the size of Denver in 45 minutes. So it's just an incredible thing. And of course, not to mention in addition to the sort of freedom that it conveys and confers upon people. And this really can and should be people of all ages and abilities. You know, people before they get their driver's licenses should be able to go places in their community, not be completely tethered to their parents and need their parents to get all over the place. People should be able to go where they want to go. And that sort of freedom, you kind of couple that with the health benefits, both the physical and mental health benefits of it. And it's an astonishing piece of equipment. I defy anyone to identify a machine that is as reliable, as simple as the bicycle, that can produce those kinds of outputs. It can literally transport you across a city in a short period of time. It can improve your health, on any number of levels, physical health. And there are pretty strong links between mental health and riding a bicycle. And you can just feel it. You know, you're on your bicycle and you're just like, you feel good.
I feel like for me that the first time I had that feeling was when I was riding in upstate New York by a lake which was close to my college. And before then I would just use bike to get from one place to the other and usually end up biking on the side paths, not an actual bike pathway. But our college had a bike pathway, and when I rode my bike up over there was this whole level of serotonin boosters that I felt in my brain, just relaxation, lots of thoughts that were circling around, those got processed, and it was really just a beautiful way to be mindful about the present, the past, and also manifest the future as we go.
Yeah, I would say that one thing that is fascinating about this and about the bicycle, and one of the things that we really enjoy with bike streets is this notion that it can be both highly functional. So the Bike Streets app, for example, if you need to go to the grocery store, can help you find a pleasant, quiet route to the grocery store. That's something that's highly functional that people do on a regular basis. If you're going to meet a friend, it can give you a nice, pleasant route to the coffee shop or the bar where you're going to meet your friend. It can do those things that are highly functional. And the Bike Streets app also has this great feature that I love called surprise adventure built into it. And you press the surprise adventure, it's kind of like spinning the wheel in Wheel of Fortune. And when the wheel stops, the proverbial wheel, it works kind of differently, but basically the same idea. When the wheel stops, it's pointing at some amazing destination that you've never been to, perhaps in a part of the city, in a community that you haven't visited before. And so it's incredible how it can be both incredibly utilitarian to get you just to the places that you know that you need to go, but as you're describing, it can also confer this spirit of adventure, this spirit of exploration, and this you get on your bike and you just go, and the places that you can go are just remarkable. And I think with the Bike Streets app, one of the things that we enjoy most is, of course, helping people accomplish their day-to-day tasks, but also creating this sense of wonder, which is like, wow, the places that I could possibly go are amazing.
Yeah, yeah. And also feel like it also adds into the element of you mentioned adventure, but also seeing new places, seeing new sites in new towns, exploring a new city that you are probably vacationing at. Because I've been to Chicago 3 or 4 times, but most two of the times when I went there and I was having a solo trip, I did the bike ride by the Lake Michigan that you were talking about, and it was just such a convenient way to get from one place to the other, avoid all the traffic. Also in New York, I've tried and done that, and it just I feel like it takes you faster from one place to another in these busy and mega cities, which are predominantly um, have a lot of traffic but don't have the right, I would say, resources or the traveling plan for their folks.
Yeah, it's a remarkable thing. And the one thing that I'll just add to that is it's important to think about where in the context of this, where bicycles can and should be. And for thousands of years of human history, the public spaces were the streets that were in the communities. The and streets was probably in many cases, paths, streets that meandered through communities. And those were spaces where you could find people from all backgrounds doing all sorts of things and moving around on all sorts of different devices pulling wagons, riding horses, that kind of stuff. And these were spaces that were inclusive and welcoming, and in the last 100 years public spaces have become almost entirely dominated by automobiles. And that's not to say that cars are a part of society, and that's that is the reality. What's missing is the types of public spaces where people can walk and feel comfortable, where people of all ages, abilities, and backgrounds, by which I mean, if you're a child, if you're an older person, if you're anywhere in between, you should be able to access your community and get around the way that you want to get around, especially if it's going to produce a positive health outcome. By abilities, I mean, it shouldn't just be people who are ultra confident on their bicycles. It should be people who are new to bicycling. It should be people who are maybe they use different types of bicycles, like tricycles, to provide them with a little bit more stability. People using various adaptive devices, and all backgrounds. People, irrespective of what your racial or ethnic background, should feel comfortable and safe moving around in their communities and getting from one place to another in an efficient, pleasant, and healthy manner.
Yeah, yeah. I worked for 2 years. I was working for two different elementary schools, and one thing I really saw over there was the excitement among kiddos on riding to school on a bike because they would they would take that as a huge celebration because it was the first time that they would be doing something in which they would have the autonomy, being in being in an elementary school. So it was always just fun seeing when I would be walking into school, just seeing kids and their families just coming with their bikes and um, like not communicating, commuting that way. Have you noticed that?
Certainly, kids love bike rides. Kids love group bike rides. In Denver, for example, there are a few of and in communities around the country increasingly. And Bike Streets doesn't lead these, but we are wildly supportive of these types of efforts. There are these things called bike buses, where groups of kids, it's like if you're taking the normal bus, the bus goes from point to point to point, picks up people along the way, and eventually gets to school. And the idea of a bike bus is basically the same. It just is people on bicycles using human power and active transportation to get around their community. And I have ridden with some friends who lead these in Denver, and it's amazing. It's just a beautiful thing. And again, one of the things that's so fascinating about riding a bike, and we really try with Bike Streets to bring this into the equation, and you see this a lot on the group rides, which is just people have a joyful experience. And with these bike buses, there is so much joy radiating out from the kids who are feeling empowered and capable to move themselves through their community and just being with their friends. And there's something captivating, entrancing about riding a bike. And it is writ large in these bike buses.
I feel like one of the things that really does that is the sense of community because while you're on a bike, you're looking around way more, you're observing way more, as compared to when you're in a car. Because when you're in a car or in a bus or in a train, it's very much straight focus that you're just looking up at the straight road. Whereas if you're on a bike, I feel like you're also observing the trees, the plants, the birds flying around, who's standing outside a specific store, or just little bit and minuscule things like those that we have as a community lost touch of.
I'll tell you a great story that illustrates that. And this is almost as close to a literal stop and smell the roses kind of story as you can get. So we did a bike streets group ride with the Denver Public Library during Pride Month earlier this year. And we had rainbow leis and flags and that sort of thing adorning our bikes. And as we rode through the community, the final stop, by the way, often on these bike streets rides, we have to include ice cream or paletas. In this case, it was donuts. And as we were riding through the community, what was fascinating was that it was peak linden, flower linden tree bloom season. And linden trees are incredibly aromatic. And this was not by design by any stretch of the imagination, but it was just such a point of connection to the community, to the areas through which we were riding. And we were just all like, riding our bikes down these streets, and there's another linden. Oh man, the smell would just be overwhelmingly delicious. And then there were another, stand of lindens up a ways. It was really, really special, and just something that certainly if you're in an enclosed space moving at a high speed through a community, maybe you wouldn't experience, in this case, an almost literal stop and smell the roses kind of moment.
I personally felt that when I was in New York City, because studying in upstate New York, I would go down to the city a lot of times during our summer breaks or fall breaks, spring breaks, and stuff like that. And most of the time, I would just be taking up subways or sometimes here or there Ubers, because taxis and Ubers are also A, very expensive over there, and B, it takes you the same time as taking a subway because of the traffic. And when I would be riding my bikes, I would just be looking around, and there would just be so much more that I grasped from that city in terms of culture, in terms of the way people would act, would walk, would dress. Lots of times, just seeing the polar effects of, on one side there is homelessness, on the other side there's skyscrapers, like all these different kinds of things that you can just learn and observe about life. That I Although I had traveled a lot of times through the same streets, I was either underground or I was sitting in a cab and using my phone or something at that time. So it was a very touching experience when I tried it there.
It is pretty amazing and eye-opening how being really part of your surroundings, not separated, can open your eyes to so many things. And I was reminded of that today on this bike streets ride that we did. I pointed out to some folks that one of the, and it's not really a significant point of interest in the larger scheme of things, but it was these two really amazing lion sculptures that someone had on their front stoop. Kind of, you walk up the stairs to their house, and there are these two incredible lion sculptures, and it's on this thing that we did a few years ago, the Bike Street scavenger hunt, and there are 50 just photographs of small clues of fascinating, interesting things that over the years we have seen as we have been wandering through the community. And it really highlights this unusual reality that when you're on your bike, you're really tuned in to what's going on around you. You're paying attention, you're smelling the linden trees in some cases, you're seeing these little oddities, maybe you're stopping at the little free libraries. And one of the things I should just add is that for communities, and one of the things that we try to do with bike streets, is highlight the fact that people on bicycles are not just more attuned to their community, they're not just having more happenstance interactions with neighbors and community members, but they're also much more likely to patronize local businesses because you don't have to worry about parking. You can just get off your bike, stop, lock it up, and go inside.
For sure, 110%. I agree with you on that. Um, just a few months ago, I had Nicole also on the podcast, who is a bike advocate, for the bike lobby in Denver, and she was telling me about the misconception that a lot of people have, that getting around in your car is much more faster or much more convenient because or like going to different grocery shoppings and stuff. But people fail to count up the time in which you spend around finding the right parking spots, or getting from not being stuck in the traffic or not being stuck in different transits, whereas bike just evades those problems once you become up and be part of a routine.
An observation that has fascinated me over the years since I started Bike Streets in 2018 is this idea that if you put a pin in any point in the map in Denver and you draw a circle with a 3 or 4 mile radius around that, and 3 or 4 miles, which is 6 to 8 miles an hour, is the distance you can cover in half an hour. So if you're going 6 miles an hour, which is a very slow pace, really comfortable and pleasant, you can cover 3 miles in half an hour. And so if you put a pin in a map, draw a circle with 3 mile radius around that pin, it's astonishing how much of the city that actually covers. And so if you think about a 30-minute bike ride, which of course is great for your physical and mental health, and you sort of compare and contrast that with the hypothetical drive to the same place, what's fascinating is that you don't actually lose a lot of time by riding your bike. And in some cases, depending on how much of a debacle the parking situation is, you can get there faster.
For sure. Yeah, no, I agree with you on that as well. And I feel like riding a car adds a lot to the stress levels also for a lot of folks and a lot of people, because there is just so much traffic these days. And one of the initiatives that you folks are working on, as you said, is low stress Denver bike maps that you have established and that are out there for folks to use. How do you define what a low stress map is?
So there's actually a technical definition in the city of Denver of what low stress is. So if you think about the different types of bike facilities, bike infrastructure that exist, there are some obvious ones. There are bike trails, and bike trails are considered high comfort. There are protected bike lanes. Those are considered high comfort because there is a layer of physical protection, a barrier between the bicyclists on the street and the drivers. And so those barriers can take different forms. Then the third that's considered high comfort is what in Denver we call neighborhood bikeways. Other communities call those greenways. And to be fair, one significant and important caveat to this is that these types of facilities can always be improved and made more comfortable. Just because something is labeled something doesn't necessarily mean that it is as good as it could possibly be. But those are generally the standard types of infrastructure that, at least in our community, are considered high comfort. And I think that's a fairly universal construct. They have a number of kind of common threads, but between them, that is generally the package of what's considered high comfort. We also like to describe that as low stress. High comfort is kind of hard to define, as I just took me a few sentences to explain it, but low stress is something that generally makes sense to folks, even if it doesn't exactly convey where they're going to be riding. Interestingly enough, in Denver at least, what they do not consider high comfort are traditional bike lanes. And those are traditional bike lanes where on one side you've got parked car, on the right you've got parked cars, so there might be doors that are opening, and on the left side you have traffic often at fairly high speeds passing you. And folks just generally don't feel as comfortable in those types of environments. And a more antiquated version of bike infrastructure that's not actually bike infrastructure is where on a big street they put down these things called sharrows, which are basically like the bicycle insignia with the two chevrons on top of it, and say, okay, here's your bike infrastructure, just ride in traffic. So that is clearly not a high comfort type of environment. So the way that we build the bike streets map, the low stress Denver bike map, is really by leaning on that definition and finding where there are these existing formal high comfort bike facilities, where there are trails, where there are protected bike lanes, where there are neighborhood bikeways, and then we use a lot of conversations with folks, a lot of scouting rides, a lot of group rides to identify the quiet residential streets in the spaces that aren't filled adequately by the sort of formal infrastructure. And so those four things basically, trails, protected bike lanes, neighborhood bikeways, and quiet residential streets, those form the backbone of the Bike Streets map.
Interesting. And like, how does the process work once you have a plan and these numbers and idea? How does that work along? How does that plan work when you're collaborating with the local governments um, or the local advocates who are working? How does that process work in terms of getting those things either legalized or passed around or having those main conversations with the government officials?
So our work tends to be more focused on community organizing and getting people to ride bikes. And then we have a number of organizations that we work with, that we're friends with, that do more of the policy type of work directly with the city, advocating for more investment in infrastructure, showing up to public meetings, being vocal about why bikes can improve people's lives and local business and so that's, I think, a really important element of this, is that we're working on building the community, building the number of people who feel empowered to ride, given the world as it is currently, imperfect as it may be. And simultaneously, there are a number of really solid organizations who are working directly with and have a lot of expertise in planning and the sort of traditional processes that cities undertake to define where bike infrastructure is going to be built. The important thing for us is that, as I said before, it's really essential that people are able, with the world as it exists right now, kids who are kids right now, adults who are adults right now, seniors who are seniors right now, to be able to move through the community on their bicycles, even though the sort of perfect bike network of the future is not on the ground.
I feel like there are also examples of how when government or when legal authorities take action on these things, how beneficial they could be. Because I feel like a great example of that is Netherlands. I was reading a statistic about Netherlands that completely blew my mind, is that they have around 17 million people that reside in Netherlands, but 20 there are 22.5 million bikes that people have up over there. So there are more bikes than people, and this did not happen over the years. It happened just in couple of years when Netherlands started prioritizing bike laws and started prioritizing bike lanes, because they have, I guess, 35K kilometers of miles through which people can bike around. And I feel like that just shows that people are ready to bike, people are ready to take part in it, but correct infrastructure needs to be there in place for them to do that.
That's right. I think that's a good point. And the one thing that I'll just add is that our estimates are that in the city of Denver itself, which is about 750,000, we estimate that there are, based on the statistics that we've seen, that there are 500,000 bicycles in the city of Denver. And that's an astonishing number. The potential of those is really critical. And the thing that gives me great hope, and what is really visible on our Bike Streets rides, for example, the one that I led today with 75 or so folks, is that when, as a community, we are organized and we are all riding the same streets, meaning we say, okay, these are the places that we are going to ride as a community. Even if you're not riding in a formal group per se, you're just going from one place to the next, is that if we ride the same streets and you create this strength in numbers, this kind of bike density that I described earlier with the critical mass rides in Chicago, that the streets are transformed, that we have the power, the capability, the capacity, and certainly the bicycles to transform the streets as they are. Because driver behavior changes quite dramatically. And in a way, when there are a lot of bicyclists on a street, driver behavior is very different. And in many ways, this is favorable to the folks who live on those streets, because what you'll see is that when there are a lot of bicyclists riding on a street, drivers are far less likely to use those streets as cut-through routes to try to avoid the big arterial corridor, that's one street over. Often if there's a traffic jam, you'll see people try to cut through neighborhoods and use residential streets for a purpose for which they're not designed, and really is detrimental to the fabric of the community. And so when you have a lot of bicyclists on a street, I like to describe it as bike density, which is really ultimately what bike streets work is about, is creating bike density. And when you have bike density, it just radically, it's like it can happen now. It happened this morning. You have this transformed urban environment that is far more conducive to self-propelled human transportation. It is remarkable how a small group of people, it doesn't have to be 75, it doesn't have to be 500 or 1,000, it can be 10 or 20, can dramatically change the landscape of a street.
Yeah, yeah. And how do you feel about, or what do you feel about the initiatives that the Colorado government has implemented in terms of providing rebates to people for e-bikes and having this as a monthly thing? How important are such initiatives uh, to bring forward more awareness around biking?
They're great. I mean, the city of Denver, the climate office known as CASR, has done an amazing job getting people e-bike rebates. The Colorado state government has followed suit. And the important story behind e-bikes is that so much of what we do, what Bike Streets does, is about creating access and saying, hey, you can actually go places today on your bike. And what the real story of e-bikes is access. They create access for folks who may not want to get to work or wherever their destination is sweaty, or have to deal with a lot of hills, or are working in the direction of a more healthy, active lifestyle, but aren't particularly strong or confident yet on their bikes. One of my favorite stories is a guy who has ridden on a number of our group bike rides for years, started on an e-bike, and really was determined to turn his personal health around. I think his personal physical health had slipped over the years. And so he decided that the way he was going to address that was by riding his bike. And he bought an e-bike at first and really started to build his fitness. And then he bought a regular bike, and he still rides the e-bike a fair bit, but he also rides the regular bike. And through that process, over a couple of years, has dramatically, by his own description, improved his health and physical well-being. It's incredible.
It definitely is, because even in my practice, when I work with family members, especially when I work with parents who have a lot of kids, and one of the things I encourage them is to take the kids to the park and spend some time with them in the outdoors, because with COVID and with all the technology evolving, I feel like we are becoming much more inclined towards being indoors, whereas we were always supposed to be, as human beings, we were supposed to be outdoors. And when I encourage them to go to the parks or go for short bike rides within their community, the amount of feedback and the responses I hear from them are just very, very motivational, because it increases their bond with their children. It improves their own wellness in terms of making their legs do a specific amount of exercise, as compared to they would just come back from home and just would just stay home taking care of the kids. And just like it would open up doors to them in terms of relationship building and bonding that even I wouldn't have thought about when I was suggesting just a little bit of an idea of, like, why don't you go for a 20 minutes bike ride, let's say, in the evening when you come back with your kids, and it's really beneficial.
One of the things that is so neat about bicycling, to that point, is that you can incorporate it today into your life without having to carve out a bunch of additional time, right? Because everyone has to go places. And what we like to say with Bike Streets is that there are really two amazing ways in which getting on your bike and going places helps you physically and mentally. And in the physical department, there's this idea of incidental activity, which is that on occasion when you're riding your bike, not that you have to ride at a high speed or at an aggressive pace, quite to the contrary, but say there's a little hill, your heart rate might go up a little bit as you go up that hill. And just having a slightly, elevated aerobic activity is so good for your health. And that's without having to carve out a bunch of extra time. That's just doing your daily business, going to the places that you need to go. And then, of course, you get on your bike and you're going places and you're just outside by definition. And being outside is great. And you might smell the linden trees.
You definitely might. How have you seen it echo or reflect in your own life in terms of struggles that you may have been through? How has bike impacted your life or improved your life?
That's a great question. I mean, I, I think that exercise and activity is one of the best ways to deal with stress and anxiety. And so when I'm feeling that way, I reach for my bike. In the middle of the day, if it's been stressful, I might go for a 20 or 30-minute ride. I might come up with something. I might press the surprise adventure button on the Bike Streets app and go to the bakery that it sends me to that I haven't been to in a long time, or something along those lines. And so it's remarkable how just getting on a bike and having a little bit of physical activity can just help you breathe deep and release some of that stress.
For sure. And was this something that you always thought about that you'd be doing when you were a kid, that you
Huh.
want to improve and impact the biking community, or did you have other plans back then?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I mean, I have always loved riding my bike. I have always loved riding bikes with other people. I don't know that I necessarily saw a means to make that into a career.
And how did that thing shape up? Because you're an entrepreneur yourself. You had other projects that you were working on. How did this project get manifested?
Yeah, funny enough. So I previously led a different technology company, and the way that I got to work was I rode my bike. It was probably 3 miles or so in each direction. It was about, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes. And it was this incredible talk about stress relief, this incredible buffer in the morning between getting the hustle and bustle, getting my kids ready for school, and at the end of the day, this buffer between work, which was intense and stressful, and being home and being present with my crew. And I rode for years the sort of normal prescribed bike lanes, which were actually bike lanes typically in that sort of low comfort category. And on one day, I just decided that I decided I was getting a little stale and that I was going to try another route. And I hadn't really enjoyed my normal bike lane in quite some time because it was just stressful. I was finding that I was getting passed by a lot of big trucks and that sort of thing. And so I started riding one street over. And it just radically transformed the experience from this sort of like adrenaline experience to just, a dopamine experience. It was just like pure bliss. And as I needed to get from one place to another in the community, I would increasingly be like, okay, well, maybe I could put together a route that has similar characteristics. And I remember I was in this bike shop one day and I was talking to one of the mechanics, this grizzled urban veteran of bicycling. And I was telling him what I was doing, that I was sort of in my mind cobbling together this map of how to get from one place to another. And he said, "Oh, well, I do the same thing." And I was just sort of flabbergasted to hear that. And we pulled out a map, maybe Google Maps or something like that. I don't remember exactly. And he lived in a community in the far east northeast part of Denver, and he traced his route for me. And I couldn't believe it. It was fascinating how this guy who seems to be the archetype of what you would imagine an urban cyclist would be, grizzled, hardcore, sick bike, that kind of stuff. How he was really designing his own high comfort route. And I just started talking to more and more folks and realized that this was the way that people dealt with things. And it was the nugget of putting that together, the plausible reality that there was this high comfort bike network hiding in plain sight, putting that together with my Chicago experience of riding in a city transformed by large groups of people, that made me think, okay, well, maybe this is actually a thing, that there is a nexus to be had between creating a high comfort map and getting lots and lots of people to ride the same streets. And that was sort of the kernel that became Bike Streets. And I would say that 6 years later, while the methodology might have changed, the technology might have improved, the Bike Streets app has come a tremendous distance. That is still essentially what we're trying to do. We are trying to organize the community to get tons of people to ride the same streets, with this belief that as more people ride the same streets, as you have bike density, you get even more and more people feeling confident out there, and you have, at least in theory, a virtuous circle.
No, I feel like when there is a passion involved in something, or when you are so spiritually connected with that thing, it just makes the whole journey a lot more fun and a lot more easier to do. Like, because you would completely agree with me. I feel like on this point that entrepreneurship journey is never linear. It's always has ups and downs. It's like a wave. So you might have gone through some share of your struggles too, but having that passion and having that spiritual connection with the projects and the stuff that you're working with would have made that thing a little bit easier.
It certainly imbues the work with a lot of meaning.
Yeah. And can you touch a little bit briefly about some of the challenges and struggles you may have faced in this entrepreneurship journey while establishing this brand and the company and the organization?
Yeah, I mean, any entrepreneurial journey, like any bike ride, includes hills and valleys. And depending on where you're riding in Denver, there are more hills and valleys than other places. I think that really at the essence of entrepreneurship is developing uh, the belief, the understanding that it is a process, and the process is about dealing with adversity, acknowledging that that is elemental to the whole process, and persevering through that adversity, which is to say, things are never as good as you want them to be in an entrepreneurial journey. I mean, I haven't come across any entrepreneurs who would say that like they're doing as well or better, than they could possibly imagine. Everyone acknowledges that there are always there, even the great companies that have really broken through on a large scale. There are always ways in which they can be improved. And for us, at its core, I think that acknowledging that, okay, the way to view your work is to look at certain successes as successes where you say, okay, that's great, how can we make it even better, and certain things that would appear on the surface like failures as not failures but running the process and trying and opportunities to learn from your mistakes and to get better and better over time. So I, I think that my entrepreneurial ethos is sort of rooted in candor, the idea that the best way to start getting better is to acknowledge where you're strong and where you're weak, and to prioritize those weaknesses, prioritize the things that you think need to be improved, to tap into the pain and discomfort, the things that you know in your bones, and also through data are where you need to improve, and to really employ a scientific process where you're identifying a problem, hypothesizing based on your experience what you think might improve, and solve that particular problem, trying that out, being honest with yourself about whether that works. And if it does, great, you make it part of the way that you work. And if it doesn't, you acknowledge it and you try it again. And you just kind of keep doing this bit by bit over time. And I have long thought of a startup as like a stack of pancakes, where it's like you run all these, these experiments, you run all these processes where you're trying different things, and like every now and then you get a really good pancake, and that's like the foundation. That's your first pancake. And then bit by bit over time, you sort of layer things on. And that edifice at the end, the stack of pancakes, is really the venture. And I think that this applies to not just the sort of traditional tech startup types of entrepreneurial ventures, but social entrepreneurship, as well as governmental entrepreneurship, people who are trying to produce different outcomes in governmental environments.
Well, no, that's a really, really insightful and empowering mindset to have. I feel like trusting yourself, trusting your vision, believing in it, and being resilient and just keep moving forward with that mindset, and trying to improve every day on whatever you can improve on, because I feel like that really projects growth and that really projects being evolved within the community that you're working with. You've worked on not just one but multiple entrepreneurship experiences. You're a parent yourself. Your life is really busy. So how do you manage all these stresses around? How do you manage life? And when things come up, how do you navigate those struggles and those challenges of life?
Yeah, that's a good question. um, I mean, you manage, right? I think you prioritize. I try to identify those things that are most important and those things that are least important, and spend as much time as I can on those things that are most important. And I often find that just getting on my bike and going for a ride is is a really good way to kind of decompress. But what I will say is that, look, everyone is very busy in our lives, but I think that if we look at the screen time statistics on our phones, on our computers, we can discover a lot of time. Time is our most precious resource. That's a cliche that everyone knows, but often we are not so mindful in how we use our time. I'm not saying I'm any paragon of virtue, but there is, I think, a significant amount of time to be discovered doing things that don't actually give us the sort of satisfaction, don't give us the purpose, the meaning that we might find through other things. And often a window into that is in the same spirit as being candid about what's working in your entrepreneurial venture, or not, being candid about what is working with your time and your time management. I think that often the screen time feature, if you've got an iPhone, for example, can be a really meaningful window into that. And so when I was in business school at the University of Chicago, I became acquainted with an idea called choice architecture. And the idea behind choice architecture is that the world is designed, the world around us is designed, and we have agency in designing our own world and our own environment. And so choice architecture, a simple example of choice architecture is like, where do you put the cookies? Are the cookies out on the counter, or are the cookies high up on a shelf in a closet where you can't see them? I would guess that in most cases, certainly in my own, if the cookies are out on the counter, the cookies are going to be eaten faster than if they're hidden and out of sight and out of mind. And so choice architecture exists in all aspects of our lives and can really be a powerful tool for time management. When we look at the ways in which we want to spend our time, and we look at the decisions that we make about how we use, in particular, how we use our devices. And not to get too far afield, and it's ironic because I build the Bike Streets app, I build an app for the phone, but we can make decisions that are simple that will really give us time back. For example, simple ones like turning off push notifications, turning off haptics, turning off dings on your phone, deleting certain apps that you find yourself getting sucked into that you don't want to, making the tough decision. Those are all choices. Those all represent choice architecture. And there are probably things that I would find interesting and enjoyable on my device that I have prevented myself through choice architecture from engaging in. And that's one way to reclaim time in a very busy world.
Yeah, I feel like the apps and especially the mobile stuff is very addicting, and people just tend to lose a lot of time when they are on it. Even if they use it with the intention that we're only gonna check, let's say, Twitter or Instagram or TikTok just for 10 minutes, it never ends up being 10 minutes. It ends up being 25. Yeah.
It never ends up being 10 minutes. And that's by design, right? Because when you engage with one of those platforms, you are engaging with people who are developing technology through very careful experimentation that identifies the ways to tap into your psyche and convince you to make decisions that aren't in your best interest. And our time is our most precious thing. And what do they want more than anything? They want our time. And so if we're not careful and we make certain decisions like having push notifications on, having the apps on our phone in the first place, it really is very difficult for us to resist all of the honey traps that they have set for us.
Yeah, very true. Because I feel like their main way of making money is through keeping us on those apps or on those softwares for as long as they can. Because those apps might be free, but they're not actually free because you are giving away your time. And as people say, time is money, or time is of value. So I completely agree with you on that. I wanted to touch a little bit about around people or listeners who might be very busy, whether those be college students, university students, school students who have projects after projects or deadlines after deadlines, or those be folks who are working 9 to 5 jobs and trying to make their ends meet. How would you say, or what would be your advice around how can they find a little bit of time to go around on a bike ride or to invest their time and energy into it? What would be the some of the few first steps that you would encourage them to take?
So with bike streets, we think that you should be able to replace simple trips in your life first, right? So rather than saying, I'm going to go ride 10 miles, go ride a mile, find a coffee shop or identify something that's on your calendar in the next week that is super close, that is very easy to get to. And if you're in Denver, you can use our map and our app. And if you're not in Denver, you can look on Google Maps or you can talk to your friends or you could walk the route or something like that. But something that already is on your calendar, meaning don't carve out time. This is not like trying to create time to go to the gym. This is something that you are already locked in and planning on doing. And you already have to get, you have to get there. You might be planning to drive, but you know that you need to get there. And so rather than driving that 1 or 2 miles, hop on your bike and you'll be there as quickly as if you were to drive, and maybe even quicker, including the quest for parking. And so just starting with simple trips that already exist and taking a quick look at your calendar and saying, what is someplace that I'm already going to be this week? Okay, I'm going to put on my calendar that I'm going to ride my bike there rather than drive my car. It's something that is already on the calendar. It's something that is happening. It is not trying to find more time. It's something that's already planned. If you can just start to turn those trips occasionally into bike trips, you might feel empowered bit by bit. And I think it's important to just try those small steps first rather than being like, I'm going to become a bike commuter to work, or I am going to ride 25 miles on my bike a week. Instead, I am going to try to take one or 2 mile trip each week. And I'm not going to do something special or different. I'm just going to go to the place that I'm already planning on going.
Yeah, sounds very spiritual, like setting up the intention and then taking up many and small steps towards achieving or towards achieving up that goal for that intention.
I would also just say I empathize with folks because fundamentally this is about behavior change. And driving a car is one of the most entrenched behaviors that exists, right? People just sort of assume without really thinking through it that if you're going from one place to another, you're going to drive there. And so behavioral change, and I acknowledge the difficulty and that this is one of our great challenges with bike streets is that this is fundamentally about behavior change and a very significant sort of fundamental behavior about how people move around their communities. So I don't want to trivialize the significance of that. It's not easy.
Yeah, change is never easy, I feel like, but we are in my headspace, we are at a time when these kinds of actions would be much more encouraged and motivated because of how much expensive and how much time consuming driving is becoming, with all the insurance prices rising up, with all the installment prices, interest rising up. I feel like a lot of people will find much more um much more inspiration in terms of riding up a bike for either work or for their grocery shoppings, or just to go out for many little chores that they might have to run.
One thing
Uh,
I'll just add on that point that I made previously about the efficiency of the bicycle and that a carrot can take you across the city is that the cost of owning and operating a bike is, you know, is ridiculously low. It's the cost of the carrot plus the cost of the bicycle. And you can get in a city, you can get a, you know, a decent bike that's well suited for a city for 100 or $200 on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace.
yeah, and with all the incentives that the government is giving with tax rebates and stuff, and or with rebate money, I feel like it just becomes even more accessible and convenient to you for folks to tap into. Where do you see these initiatives heading up? Where do you see the future of bike streets heading towards?
Yeah, good question. So the future, I think, is I certainly envision and hope for and work for in the trenches every day is one in which people feel confident moving around their communities however they want to move around their communities. If you need to drive, okay, that's great. This is not about ending use of cars. This is about people feeling safe and confident, comfortable, happy, filled with joy, doing transportation the way that they want to do transportation. That could be on a bike. I often ride a skateboard. It could be on a scooter. It could be by foot. It could be in a car. And the public, the public right of way, the public spaces that we have currently are not really well designed in most cases to accomplish that. And so the vision of the future is a vision in which a child is comfortable, confident, able, empowered to, encouraged by their parents to go to the places that they want to go on a bike, to go to a friend's house, to go to the swimming pool in the summer, to go to the library for a summer reading program, to go to a rec center where, you know, something fun is happening. If our public spaces are transformed, the possibilities are dramatically different for so many people. And there are two ways to accomplish that transformation of public spaces. And the first one that is most important and most significant is communities need to invest heavily in transforming public spaces so that they can be used in a variety of different ways. That's critical. And the other is that people united, people organized in their communities can stake a claim to these spaces and say, we're going to ride our bikes, we're going to walk, and we're going to do so collectively. One of the things that in the bike streets history has always been sort of a fascinating observation is, and one of our sort of unofficial slogans is to follow the basketball hoops. And often in Denver, what you'll see are basketball hoops that are on the street. So someone in a neighborhood has put a basketball hoop that is out on the street, and maybe with chalk, they have drawn a three-point line and a free throw line. And often you'll see kids playing basketball. And that is the potential that public spaces have. Public spaces, we have come to think of as spaces that are exclusively occupied by cars. And our lives in our communities could be deeply enriched, not by the sort of total abandonment or replacement of vehicular travel, but by a more democratized view on what types of activities can and should happen in public spaces.
Well, Yeah, and I feel like one of those activities or things that could happen up in public spaces is what you're implementing with bike streets. Uh, just to wrap things up, what are some future plans that you have for bike streets? Where is the organization heading towards, and are there any events that are coming up?
So on October 6th in Denver, we are running a bike streets ride called Surprise Adventure, where we will all meet in a park, Washington Park, and we will spin the proverbial Wheel of Fortune wheel. We might actually make an analog version of the Surprise Adventure button that exists in the Bike Streets app. And we will spin that wheel, and that wheel could take us to any of a dozen or 2 dozen destinations. And wherever the wheel stops, we'll ride there. And the point of that ride is to show folks that you can really go anywhere. We're going to go to this one place because we can't go everywhere. But on this very, very conspicuous, visible wheel of 24 fun, interesting destinations, most of which probably include ice cream, that you can, on a lark, on a whim, go to those places, and you can go to those places now. And it's not going to be perfect. The infrastructure is not perfect in its current form, but it's incredibly empowering for people to discover through our bike streets work or on their own that you can go anywhere today on a bike.
Very nice. And how can people reach out to you? How can people get in touch with you?
Folks can go to bikestreets.com to learn more about the work. They can send an email to info@bikestreets.com. In all likelihood, I will respond to that. And in the spirit of candor, I invite everyone to share their feedback, constructive as well as supportive. Constructive feedback is really how we learn and how we grow and how we continue to get better on an ongoing basis. So the good, the bad, and the ugly, send it our way.
Thank you. And I'll post up all the links for all our listeners and folks within the description of this video. So you can always reach out to Avi about it and talk to him and get in touch with this amazing work that he's doing. Just one last question to wrap things up. What would your message be for any of the listeners who might be listening to this podcast and either might be interested in bike riding or may have not yet tapped into that venture for themselves? What would your closing remarks or message be for them?
I would just say that a life on a bicycle is a really liberated existence in touch with the community. And it's something that anyone can have. And the way to do it is to just dust that thing off, pump up the tires, and go for a very, very short ride. And you'll feel it. You'll feel it.
Very true. I completely echo that. And you heard him, folks. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me today, Avi. I'm extremely grateful for this. And thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. Thanks for your time.
All right. Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.
Good stuff. Thanks so much.